Hello, and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie Ostwalt. Mindfulness. It's a concept that has been popularized by Western psychologists and self-help authors. But mindfulness has much more ancient roots in Buddhism and meditative practice. Our guest today, Dr. Lindsay, has studied mindfulness in the context of its Buddhist roots and has some very interesting information to share about mindfulness, Buddhism, and the practice of Buddhism in Japan. Welcome, Dr. Lindsay.
Thank
you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I wanted to start by just letting you talk about yourself a little bit. You're currently our university librarian, but you also have a PhD in religious studies. So tell us about your background in religious studies.
Yeah, that's right. So right now I'm working as a reference and instruction librarian here at the Belk Library, a wonderful library at this university. So, but before that, I did study religion, especially Buddhism and Japan, East Asian religions in graduate school for a number of years.
Mm-hmm. How did you come to focus on Japan?
It was really in college. I had the opportunity in a study abroad program to live and do a little bit of Buddhist practice in Japanese temples. Okay. So through that, I became really interested in Japan and Buddhism.
And then you had the opportunity. I guess you spent some time there during your graduate studies.
I did. So I've been over there learning the language. The language is very, very difficult for those of us, who are native English speakers. So, it's one of the hardest languages. So I was over there about 8 months in a language school before I entered a PhD program, and then towards the end of my graduate studies, I was also there again for some dissertation research.
Did you learn the language in 8 months?
No.
Or you got started at least.
Yeah, I had studied a little before that, but it's a lifetime endeavor. It's one of the languages that, if you meet a person from the who grew up in the U.S. and they claim they're very fluent in Japanese, you should be a little bit skeptical.
Well, I'm familiar with Chinese Buddhism
yes.
mostly, and we'll come back to this later in the interview, but are there many differences between Japanese and Chinese Buddhism, or Japanese Buddhism and Buddhism elsewhere in East Asia?
Yeah, so a lot of the Buddhism in Japan is related to China. So later in the interview, I think we'll talk about this major tradition of Buddhism that I've studied, and their main figure, their founder, that sort of went to China and actually brought this tradition to Japan. So there are major connections, right, between Japan and China. But at the same time, Japan, is an island nation, a nation of a number of islands. So it's developed. Buddhism has developed there, in relation to Japanese culture, in relation to the Shinto religion, which is basically the former religion that was already there.
Right. Now, one of the things that we try to do on this program is to demonstrate and talk about how religious concepts are used in everyday life, or how there can be crossover between theory and theology, I guess, in religion, and how people live their lives. One of the concepts that you're familiar with and that you like to talk about, and that comes out of Buddhism, is the concept of mindfulness. Could you talk a little bit about that? What is mindfulness? How does it relate to the way we live our lives?
Right. So mindfulness now in American culture is sort of its own form of meditation practice, and it's it's been linked to health benefits. There have been a number of studies. Showing the real benefits of actually doing this practice. So a lot of what it is just learning to live less in terms of your ordinary habits, and actually gaining the ability to sort of step back from your experience and actually observe what's going on, in terms of your thoughts, in terms of your emotions, mm-hmm. Sort of without judgment. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so you want to be aware of what you're doing in the moment, I guess,
yes.
rather than operating on autopilot, which it seems to be in the West, particularly as we get busier and busier, we seem to fall back on, as you said, our habits rather than really considering what we're doing and being concentrating on it as well.
Right. So there are a number of different practices related to this, and part of meditation is just slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
It's really just slowing down, even stopping, for a time and being quiet and paying attention to what's going on internally.
And you said paying attention without judgment.
Yeah.
That's an interesting phrase. Can you expound on that a little bit? Of the without judgment part.
Well, I mean, a lot of our experiences, we're judging just sort of naturally, or sort of, in terms of our habits, we're judging other people, in terms of what they're doing, in terms of what they're saying. Mm-hmm. We're also judging ourselves. So, and that, I think from a psychology standpoint, it's actually harmful. It's actually, not the healthiest way to live a life. So one of the things that it helps you do if you do this practice is actually step back more and realize that's just a thought. I may prefer that I didn't have this thought, but it is just it is a thought.
Right. So do you think as Westerners we're too hard on ourselves sometimes? Is that kind of where that we're hypercritical of our own actions? I mean, I know we can be hypercritical of others, but we seem to internalize this as well.
Yeah, I think that's part of our culture. Sometimes just the idea that we even that we have to win,
Right.
at any cost, and putting pressure on ourselves to succeed, in different endeavors. I think that is a big part of the culture.
Right. So you mentioned that, or you alluded to the fact that Western psychologists have picked up on this idea of mindfulness, and even though they may not be coming from a Buddhist perspective, have been able to incorporate the practice into stress reduction programs. And I think you said there was even some programs on campus about mindfulness. So can you give some examples about how you can take this concept and use it in a work setting, for example, like Appalachian's campus,
Right.
maybe separated from its Buddhist roots, but used in a psychological setting?
Yeah, so there's a very wonderful program on campus called Koru Mindfulness, probably from, and I'm going to mess up the terminology, the Counseling Services Center is promoting this and teaching classes. I did the basic workshop, the first class last year, and through that you learn a number of practices. These different types of meditation practices. One is an eating meditation where you actually, you're given. Usually it's a raisin, and you just, that's the only thing you're doing is just eating that raisin, and paying attention, to the sensations of what's going on, in your mouth, to the experience of doing that. So one of the things that it is known for is just helping to cope with stress. It's not going to, I don't think any even meditation teacher is going to guarantee that if you do this practice you're going to relieve all of your stress, but it gives you sort of a way to sort of step back from your experience and sort of live in a different way that's sort of less anxious.
Mm-hmm. So this practice is something that, it's living meditation. You're doing it all day long. It's not retreating to a quiet spot for a few minutes in the morning and letting your mind wander. This is something that you try to bring into life in an hourly way, a minute-to-minute basis even.
Yeah, that's right, and it's I think it is productive even to bring it into the workplace.
Right.
Thinking of your experience, in group meetings, paying attention non-judgmentally to your reactions. If you're getting really frustrated,
Yeah.
In a group meeting or things like that.
Right. So when mindfulness is used in a work setting like this, with the focus being on stress reduction, calming the mind and so forth, is this then true to the Buddhist purpose of this practice, or is there, sometimes when we get a hold of these concepts and use them differently, we change the meaning in some way, but is this true to the original purpose of mindfulness in Buddhism?
Well, I think it would be possible to answer that both with a yes and a no. So a yes in the sense that Buddhism from the beginning is really about understanding suffering, understanding how you are suffering, and learning forms of meditation, forms of devotional practice that help you reduce that suffering, your own suffering, but also more generally. So in that sense, I think it is, very, very much in line, with so much of the Buddhist tradition, but at the same time, it is a new context. We're sort of doing these forms of meditation in very different contexts than what was done previously. So one of the major places where this, especially the mindfulness-based stress reduction really started was in a hospital. It was in the UMass hospital with John Kabat-Zinn, one of the major figures who was just teaching, people who were undergoing whatever type of medical issue, and stress related to that, giving them ways to cope with that. So
right.
so that context is very different. That sort of secular medical context is very different from than the traditional Buddhist temple. The religious context where there would be chanting. There would be all these rituals. The whole meditation practice would be embedded in this whole ritual framework.
Right.
And religious framework. It really was a religious framework. I don't think you could say that it's not. Yeah.
So when people like John Kabat-Zinn use mindfulness in a medical setting, scientific setting, there's real empirical evidence that this works, right? I mean, this has been tested and tried, and some of these techniques actually work quite well. Is that correct?
Right. So there's been quite a bit of research, yeah. So in terms of relieving, you'll find books about the mindful way through depression, the mindful way through anxiety. So there's been all types of studies about the benefits. I mean, I think it's possible to maybe overpraise it or guarantee sort of results, but at the same time, there really is empirical evidence, that it is useful.
Now you said something that caught my ear just a moment ago. You said that part of what Buddhist meditation is about is helping us to deal with suffering in life, and I was taught about Buddhism in college, and I remember the Four Noble Truths, and it begins, all life is conditioned by suffering.
Right.
Is that, by suffering, is that like anxiety, or is it physical suffering, or is it both and all the above? And is that, I guess it took me aback the first time I heard that life is just about suffering.
Yeah, and part of it's an issue of translation, which is really difficult. So in terms of the traditional teachings, there's this concept of dukkha. You would normally see it transliterated as duhka. And that we often, the simple way to translate that is suffering, but it's actually more complicated. So it's really just this sense of unsatisfactoriness.
Right.
So the sense that life is not what it could be. The sense that something is off.
So we're somehow incomplete.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
yes.
and we're searching for that completion.
Yes.
Yeah. Something else you said about Buddhism a while back when we were talking, which I thought was interesting, and I guess it's really more about religion in Japan than Buddhism in particular. But you suggested that when you think about being religious or spiritual in Japan, that you really are sort of a syncretic. You pull together traditions and ideas from various places. That's an idea that's foreign to us, I think, in the West. Can you say a little bit about that, please?
Yeah. So here, if normally we think of religious identity, as only being singular. You can be a Christian, you can be a Jew, you can be a Muslim, you can be a Buddhist, but we don't necessarily think that it's wise or sort of natural to mix these traditions and identities.
Right.
But it's really different in Japan. So in Japan, most people, whether they would identify as such, they really do things that are strongly associated with this Shinto tradition, this ancient tradition in Japan. They also do things related to Buddhism. So the funerals in Japan, tend to be. I mean, one of the stereotypes of Japanese Buddhism is that it's mainly a funeral religion. So a big part of the work of the priest now is actually doing these funerals. But it would be common for a Japanese person, at other points in their life, on New Year's Day they would often go to a Shinto shrine. They would say prayers, for the new year. Different points in their life, even a university student. Really stressed out might go to a Shinto shrine and pray for success in their exams.
Right.
So they're really all these different strands, these different traditions, and the same person in most cases is going to participate in a lot of different things.
That seems like a really enlightened way to view religion and spirituality, rather than to identify with one in particular, to be able to relate to one or more spiritual practices, and that seems like that's something we could learn from the Japanese. Before we end, I want to give you a chance to talk about some of your experiences in Japan in particular, and we have a couple of images.
Yes.
I think the first image we have is, and I probably won't pronounce this right, but it's the Koya-san Temple. Is that close? Maybe you can tell us about this temple, where it is, and what you did there.
Oh yeah, sure. So for this was one of the major places that I've actually studied. One of the major topics of my research was this site. So it is a mountain in Japan, Mount Koya, or the High Plains Mountain. This would be one of the many temples there. So they would have over 100 of these structures. On the mountain. It is associated with this one tradition of Japanese Buddhism that's not it's not nearly as famous as, say, Zen is here in the United States, but that tradition is called Shingon, or True Word Buddhism. So it's a very interesting tradition, that goes back, many years.
Right, and this particular picture I like because this looks like what we would call a Zen garden, I guess, in the United States. There's a particular aesthetic to this type of landscaping. Maybe you could comment on that just a bit. Yeah,
this place in general, the whole mountain, with the various temples is very beautiful. So there's a lot of thought into, not just the architecture, but also the garden. So I don't know, you can barely see in that photograph, but the sand or the rocks, around the big rocks, they're actually raked,
right, probably
in a particular style, for the aesthetic.
Yeah. So this True Word Buddhism, as you phrased it, has a founder, Kukai.
That's right.
Okay, so we have an image of Kukai,
yes,
or a stylized image, and then I think we also have a artwork here of an episode from Kukai's life. Maybe you could comment on that just a bit.
Yeah. So he was probably is the most famous monk in Japanese history. And he's strongly associated with this place. What this is this is the story where he came to the mountain. The story is he was actually in China, and he had this ritual implement that he wanted to use to select basically the best location to build a monastery in Japan. So when he was in China, he actually threw this ritual implement all the way to the Japanese islands. And their story is that it actually landed on this mountain. It landed there. So this is him when he's actually coming to the mountain, to this area the first time. And the figure on the left, the far left, is actually a local deity, sort of in disguise, in the disguise of a hunter. So these are his animals that he's using for hunting. But he sort of appears naturally there, as an indication that this particular location is really good. It's really auspicious.
Right.
As a site for a Buddhist monastery.
Wow. And it is a beautiful monastery. I'm glad he found that location. However he found it, it's a beautiful place. Well, you've mentioned a couple of times ritual. Ritual is something that's very important for religion scholars. And I would like to hear from you kind of your firsthand experience of going to a temple like this temple or others. What would one expect if, if I were to go there, what would I expect to see or to do or participate? What would the rituals be like?
Well, this place, they actually have sort of wonderful fire rituals. So if you stay, you can stay overnight in these temples. They have lodging for tourists. It's a major tourist site now.
Okay.
And you can stay there. But in the morning, they'll have a morning service, and they'll do a big fire ritual. So they'll make a big fire inside of the temple. They'll make a big fire, and they'll be chanting. So a big part of Japanese Buddhism within these temples is actually chanting. So it may be chanting sacred syllables. It may be chanting a famous sutra, which is basically a Buddhist scripture. You always have those. There'll be prayers, as part of these morning rituals in these temples. So it's fairly elaborate. This whole tradition, has very elaborate rituals, in the temple in terms of what the monks or the priests actually do.
It strikes me that in every religious tradition, rituals are a way to get participation, and that seems to be a way to get into the mindset that you originally were talking about. I mean, rituals in a sense, doing something can help as well create mindfulness and reduce stress and create a meditative spirit.
Yeah, that's right. And what I was suggesting earlier is that really even most of Buddhist meditation was occurring in these ritual settings. So like even the Zen tradition now, like we may associate it as, just sort of sitting meditation that's not necessarily connected to rituals or chanting or things like that. But historically, it really was, embedded in this whole ritual environment.
Well, this has been fascinating. I could talk to you about this all day, and we feel so fortunate to have you here on our campus, and I appreciate you taking the time today. And I'm going to have to take one of your mindfulness seminars, I think.
Okay.
Hopefully I'll have a chance to do that. But thank you, Dr. Lindsay, Ethan, and hope you'll come back sometime.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, that's it for Religion and Life this week. Join us next Monday here on App TV as we explore the ways religion approaches the topic of evil and suffering in the world. Until then, this is Ozzie Ostwalt.